Welcome to our Ngerati studio at African Utility Week 2013. We are joined here today by Davin Chown. He is the Director of Corporate Affairs, Commercial and Business Development at Mainstr Renewable Power. He's also the Director of Genesis Eco Energy. Would you like to expand on your position at Genesis and what your role is there?
Definitely. Genesis and Mainstr set up a joint venture in 2009. Genesis has been active in the South African market since 2001, so we've kind of been around the block a little in the country, have developed some of the sort of, let's call it the pioneering wind farms in South Africa, and renewables projects, so I have been there, done that. And as time moved on, we'd partnered with many people coming to South Africa trying to test the waters as far as renewables went. So people have come and gone. And in 2008, late 2008, this crowd called Mainstr, who we'd never heard of, popped up and said, well, we're from Ireland and South Africa looks great. You're looking for partners, we're keen to do something. And that's where Genesis and Mainstr got together. So a team of us from Genesis got on board with this joint venture. And we've been pretty successful, I think, from a joint venture point of view, that we've now got Jeffreys Bay Wind Farm in construction, and we've got 2 solar PV projects out of the first bidding round. So we've been pretty successful, we think, from a joint venture point of view in the South African market, given all the years of incubation and trial and error and blood, sweat and tears and gnashing of teeth and all those good things.
You say that investors have come and gone, and it astounds one when you think of the incredible rich resources that we have, renewable energy resources. What are the obstacles? Why have investors left our shores again? Is it legislation? Is it regulation? What is chasing them away? What has chased them away?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of issues. I think firstly, number one, there's an understanding of Africa and emerging markets and when timing is right for emerging markets. And not everybody has an appetite, not everybody knows how to handle an emerging market, and that term is used for a cluster of what I would call different kinds of economies. So, you know, people looked at South Africa as an emerging market. The question is Chad, Nigeria, Cameroon versus Ethiopia versus Zambia, maybe even Rwanda. You know, you could look at them and call them all emerging markets, but they've got very, very different characteristics and appetite for risk and dealing with that. So we find often people struggle to deal with South Africa, and then they say, wow, we'd like to look at the rest of Africa, but they can barely cope with the uniqueness and the difficulties around dealing with this market. So there's that issue. There's the issue of, I think there's a lot of misconception about what to deal with. And that often colors how people come in. They expect a certain thing and it doesn't happen quickly, and they leave. So the adjustment to working in these kinds of markets is very difficult for them. I think regulation, clearly, they would love to have a very well thought out, very clear, crisp process with regulation that fits and gels and is very investor friendly. Ours is a developmental agenda. There's a whole different suite of things that come in. Sometimes those two don't gel so well together. And to then deploy resources which are scarce in the context of a global meltdown in the economy has had people going, well, wow, it might be too rich for our blood right now. So if it's an easy entry, we can do it quickly, low risk, we'll do it. And that's not really what we're about. I mean, easy business, quick entry, low risk, it's not. So getting to understand the flavor of South Africa, Southern Africa, is a very different thing for a lot of people. And I think that hampers some people sometimes. It hasn't for people. When I look at what's coming out of this conference, Lake Turkana, look at the progress there, the scale, the nature of the investment. In a place like Kenya, they've got to build 482 kilometers of grid line. We're building 10, and people are going, wow, it's a lot, it's going to cost a lot of money. So, you know, it's all about scale and perception, but it's very interesting to see how things are leapfrogging ahead for Africa, in a sense.
Oh, well, that's good. Good to see that kind of development finally coming to our shores. Because we are. I mean, our infrastructure might be a bit poorly, but we certainly have the rich resources. Now, this is what interests me a lot is that we do have an abundance of solar and wind and hydro on the continent, especially you know, as you go towards Ethiopia, etc. But we've got an aging infrastructure. How are we going to integrate? You know, how are we going to get this renewable energy onto an aging infrastructure? Are they investing quite a bit into the infrastructure first? Because I mean, it's a process, surely. I mean, it's all great that you've got all this renewable energy, but surely there are systems and processes and meters that need to be introduced to be able to support it.
Sure, look, I think this duality that we have, in other words, you've got a lot of people on the continent who don't yet have access.
Yes.
And there's those particular set of energy solutions that are geared towards that.
Right.
For, let's call it the industrial component, the large energy user
Yes.
side. You know, in South Africa, we've got certain parts of our country, we've got some excellent grid resources and still a lot of availability. So if you have to go into the Vereniging areas, up into the northwest, all those mining areas have got a lot of grid capacity up there. There's a lot of need up there.
Right.
The beauty about the distributed resource is you can take it and develop power closest to where it's going to be used.
Yes.
We're still sitting and saying our power, let's call it mindset, frame of mind says we're going to develop X amount in the Northern Cape and ship it all up to Gauteng.
Right.
Wrong formula. It's not what renewables is about. Renewables is about being able to disperse it, take it closer to the places where it's needed.
Yes.
And one of the reasons we did Jeffreys Bay project down in the Eastern Cape was that it was located close to a municipality who was having severe power problems.
That's right. Yeah.
Right, so to create stability in the grid, to access for all those businesses that were suffering from outages, you could now use a free resource in that area, free fuel resource in an area that had grid infrastructure, albeit only big enough to meet their needs. You didn't need to go the massive scale. So it's a technology which can be used in a plug-and-play fashion at a scale which is manageable and usable. And the beauty, I think, from a resource point of view is that it takes us away from what we've had in the past where you have one major coal-fired power station going down. And as much as everybody says, wow, we need baseload and renewables is not baseload, you know, the point is when your baseload goes down, it's 4,000, 3,000, 2,800 megawatts at a time that knocks the system over. And we had that experience in 2008 and we still have it. So it's looking at a power system in a very, very different way, more modular, more flexible, more responsive.
Right.
So it's to get that shift. And I think we've got the opportunity in Africa to do that and not have to replicate the nature of the system that we see in other parts of the world and therefore inherit that as problems. So if you're working on a more modular, smaller system, yes, you'll need the upgrades. But look at how many mines now are coming out and saying and putting out the tenders for those 50 megawatt power plants at a time. The Anglo groups put those forward. And I think that's hugely impressive, is people are saying we're going to start doing it ourselves. So from a solar point of view, we're starting to talk about this, what we call a quiet revolution, that's starting to take place. If you look at Vodacom and the rooftop systems, that is starting to happen. And that's the brilliance of the opportunity. It's happening at so many different levels on such a wide scale that it has the opportunity to make a fundamental difference, irrespective of some of those big obstacles.
Right.
So the bigger we get, yes, the more infrastructure we've got. But the country's strategic infrastructure program, SIP as it's called, SIP 8, 9 and 10, I think it's SIP 10 is now looking at the distribution system. So, you know, there is that realization that we're going to have to upgrade things and we're going to have a different kind of system, more responsive to a more flexible power system. And that's what I find exciting, and I find exciting here to start seeing people talking about the reality of those options. It's not theory anymore because we're now building the stuff here in South Africa. We're starting to look at it in other parts of the subcontinent and saying it's being done now. It's no more theory and talk. And that's exciting.
We're now buying power from the IPPs, and so it's all happening. Now, the very intermittent nature of renewables. Do you see South Africa carrying on with coal for years to come? Do you think it will ever drop coal, or do you think that renewables will eventually finally take over?
Look, I think two things. I think there's a transition to sustainability that has to happen. Therefore, coal is not going to be, if we adopt that and say we're going to go the green economy route, which government has chosen, and it's dedicated and said we're going to make the shift and we have no choice, then coal has got a limited lifespan. But it's a reality in our mix for now because it employs tens of thousands of people, has a major impact on the economy. So you're not just going to switch it off. That's the important point. So I don't think it's an issue about the variability of a resource, or I mean, some people call it intermittence. It's not intermittent, it's variable. But I would argue that at any given time of the day, Eskom doesn't know what the load's going to be. They don't know when you're switching on your kettle, people are switching on furnaces, whatever. There's a certain pattern, but there's variability in the system, full stop. So, you know, I don't see that as the problem. I see more the problem is we've got to learn to manage a more dynamic grid and not a static grid. That's the big challenge for us, to learn how to integrate this like other countries have. So if I take our learnings from Ireland as a good example, they've got up to 40% penetration of wind into that grid. And there's two things that come out of it. Firstly, the grid operator now knows how to handle it. They can forecast it. They know how to deal with the fluctuation in the resource. They know how to do the matching and the balancing. Secondly, that amount of free fuel that's coming into a system, right, de-risks an economy and it adds to the GDP. It doesn't subtract. It takes the volatility and risk out of a system. And that's what we need from an African perspective because, as you know already, we're having such a negative impact on the GDP. Our point is loading us with fossil fuels and the burden of a fossil fuel economy. Right? When all the carbon taxes come, when those cross-border fines come, etc., that burden that we have, we've now got to start thinking creatively about how to get rid of it. So if we can use a free fuel resource that is going to impact positively on GDP, we should be doing as much as we can to do that and learning how to manage the technicalities of variability, which have been done in other markets.
Sounds like there's quite a bit of skill involved as well with this, with renewable energy. It's not just a matter of introducing it. There's processes around it and skills around it. Is South Africa ready for it?
I think the world has been ready for it. I think South Africa is ready for it. I think we've got certain challenges in terms of skilling up quickly enough, but that's the beauty of what we've seen in round one, is we were able to deploy those resources into the country. We're using that international expertise to now build our expertise. It's something we have to do. It's the best way to learn, is actually get it done, do it, and get it done by people who've been there and done it, and don't follow the pattern that I hear from some people saying, well, we have to learn by making our own mistakes. We don't have the luxury of that anymore from an African perspective. People have made these mistakes. Let's learn from them. Let's do it better, smarter, more effective. And we don't have the luxury of throwing masses of resources after fixing problems that we could have learned from more easy. We can better deploy our capital in other ways.
Well, it costs money mistakes, doesn't it?
Indeed.
So you want to try and limit
why
that.
throw it after something when there's others who can teach us to do it right the first time potentially.
Exactly. So where do you see South Africa going with renewable energy? Are we on track? Are we behind?
I think from a procurement point of view, as we call it would go, we are on track. Good. I think we could do better. I think we could do more. I understand clearly the government wants to take a step back and wants to learn, assess, look at the impacts, see how we can improve, and that's great. If we're going to improve the program, I think from the scale of resource that we have in the country and the potential, we've got room to do a hang of a lot more. Especially when I look at the impacts economically that we're able to protect the economy and hedge the economy against the volatility of commodities and etc. from a fossil fuel point of view. And given our peculiar set of economic challenges, I don't think we have a choice but to go that direction. So if we can use more renewables to hedge against that volatility in the system, improve GDP, and use less of a polluting resource, which, if you go and look at the study from the University of Pretoria, which looks at the externalities, is costing anywhere between 88 cents a kilowatt hour on top of current Eskom prices, right up to 90 cents, R1.90 a kilowatt hour. Somebody's paying that. And it's ultimately the economy that's paying that. And it makes the case alone for renewables with all of those a clear thing that why spend hard-earned currency and money in South Africa patching up the mess that we're making by trying to keep the economy going. We're not being wise that way. So I think from a renewables point of view, it's got a massive contribution into the economy to right that kind of skewed equation.
Okay. And tell me, the recession has hit Europe pretty hard. Are we finding a lot of these investors coming to South Africa to see what they can find here, or have we taken a knock as well along with the EU?
Look, I think it was initially said that we're fairly immune, that we missed the major part of that downturn, that blip on the economic radar screen, but I think it's catching us now. But however, even within that, and you see that from the volatility of the rand and various other things, but I think the important thing for us is we are seeing a lot of people still looking at South Africa and saying, well, let's go there. If you look at the number of renewables companies in South Africa, you look at the number, of international players that are here, and the scale of the investment. That tells us we're still an attractive destination.
That's good.
Some people see it negatively and say, it's all owned by foreigners and it's foreigners invading. We keep saying that we need investment. Here's the investment, let's use it wisely.
Yes.
We've got the opportunity, so let's not do what we've done now, where I understand from some sources recently that we've lost 3 big industrial projects to China because we didn't have the energy, and Eskom couldn't guarantee the energy. Now, when we've got a population that's unemployed and we're at 25%,
Yep.
and we've got, 22 million people that are on the social security system, I don't think we can afford to lose any investments. So we should be doing whatever we can, because we've got this macro picture that we really need to understand and work with closely. So we can't afford to lose investors. So if we say open up the system for investors, good, let those investors bring with them an attitude that says let's help grow local businesses too.
Yes.
That's vitally important from the jobs and the economic development in South Africa.
Absolutely.
So the two have to work hand in hand.
Well, it's growth at the end of the day. Every country wants it, and we certainly need it in South Africa.
I think so, yes.
Just in closing, were there any particular key issues that you picked up during the AUW? Was there something that interested you or surprised you or perhaps disappointed you while you were here?
No, what I found the changes, in many conferences in the past and the last time I was at the conference, it was a lot of the discussion around renewables was people were in waiting almost. Things are going to happen. Some discussions were almost still theoretical in nature. The discussion now you can see is very much around there's something happening in the energy sector, whether you look at Kusile, whether you look at the coal build, the gas plants that are in the background, or the renewables build. People are talking now about how it's being done. And there's a different kind of excitement and an exuberance about we've waited so long now, this thing's turned. And so I find the tone of discussion, a lot more of the presentations are focused on how we can do this better, because we've been learning how this is working. And that says that there's a turn and a shift, and I found that very positive. And I actually found it quite uplifting to go to something to hear people saying, we're doing this and we're so excited, where people are being saying, I wonder when it's going to happen and when will government do this and who's going to announce it. That shift is very important, I think, for the sector and for people coming and visiting, because it's being done. We're doing it now, and it's
immensely encouraging.
Yeah, it is.
Thank you very, very much for your input. I appreciate the time that you've taken to talk with us, and I'm sure that we will catch up with you during the course of the rest of the conference. Thank you to our viewers for watching us. Please note that there are other interviews on the site where you'll be able to pick up on other industry leaders and experts. And we look forward to bringing you more.